Okay, imagine this. You make all the money you ever dreamed of, become a millionaire way ahead of schedule, build this amazing business empire,
Yeah.
and then you just stop.
Stop.
Yeah, stop and say, that's enough. Not because you failed or anything, but because you consciously decide you don't actually need all that extra wealth. No fancy boats, huge houses, just enough.
Right.
And then what do you do with all that drive, that energy? You completely pivot. You start tackling poverty, like head on, and end up helping create something that changes millions of lives.
Well, it's quite a story, isn't it? It kind of flies in the face of the usual success narrative.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. The story of David Bussau. He's an Australian entrepreneur who went from serious personal wealth to being a really key person in microfinance, co-founding Opportunity International.
We've got quite a bit of material here, haven't we? Sources covering his whole life, really. His early days, his businesses, that big turning point, and then, the philosophy behind it all and the impact.
Yeah, good stack. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack all this. Let's pull out the key stuff, understand the moments that mattered, the thinking behind it, and what kind of legacy David Bussau's work has left. What can we actually learn from all this?
Sounds good. Where should we start? The beginning seems logical.
Let's do it. The sources really emphasize his early life. He grew up in New Zealand in an Anglican boys' home, an orphanage, basically. So scarcity. That was his reality from day one.
Yeah, that context of Sedgley Boy's home seems critical. It wasn't like he read about poverty, he lived it. He understood lacking resources, being kind of on the outer.
That even there, you see this entrepreneurial spark. It's kind of amazing. At 15, still in the home, he rents a hot dog stand.
Right. And not just one. He quickly scaled it to 3, got other boys from the home involved. The sources say he left school early, just wanted to do things.
And kept going, right. Hamburger stand, fish and chips.
A bakery he apparently flipped for a huge profit, then a pancake company he automated. There's a definite pattern the sources point out. Learn it, improve it, make it profitable, sell it, move on. A real serial entrepreneur, almost from childhood.
And wasn't there some story about him telling the other kids he'd be a millionaire by 40?
Yep, that prediction comes up.
Yeah.
And the sources say he actually beat that deadline by a good few years, hit it in his early or mid-30s.
How did he make that jump?
Well, he moved to Sydney. His wife needed a different climate and got into construction. Started as a foreman, quickly became a partner, and then ended up owning several successful companies. We're talking high-end architectural projects employing maybe 100 people. He clearly had a knack for business.
So he achieves this massive financial success, and then comes what the sources call this really pivotal moment, reaching the economics of enough.
That phrase really sticks out, doesn't it? It wasn't about burning out or failing. It was a conscious choice. Around his mid-30s, he'd made more than enough money for a comfortable life.
You just didn't need more.
It seems like it. He realized accumulating more wealth wasn't the goal anymore. The sources suggest that hitting that personal enough point made him ask, okay, what now? How should I use these resources, especially given where I came from? He wasn't interested in the usual billionaire toys.
And that realization is what sort of redirects him towards service.
Exactly. That's the big shift. And the first major event the sources highlight is Cyclone Tracy hitting Darwin in 1974.
Oh, yeah. Devastating. Left thousands homeless.
And David didn't just write a check. He packed up his family and moved to Darwin for 4 months. He was right there on the ground, organizing volunteers, overseeing rebuilding crews, even leading national fundraising efforts.
Wow. Hands-on.
Very. And then, almost right after that, another call comes. An earthquake in Bali, 1976. It destroyed a church in a pretty remote village, Blimmingsari.
And his pastor asked for help.
Yeah. So again, David moves the family, this time to this village in Indonesia, a completely different world.
What was the situation there?
A small Christian community, apparently facing some discrimination, living very simply. His first job was just helping rebuild the church building itself, but that led to a practical problem.
Which was?
Concrete. You need water for concrete, right? And the village didn't have a reliable water source.
So fixing the church meant fixing the water problem first.
Pretty much. That immediate need sparked a much bigger project. Building a dam, laying pipes, bringing water right to the village.
And there was something interesting about how they did that water project, wasn't there?
Yes, this is a really insightful detail from the sources. They deliberately piped water to 2 nearby Hindu villages before they brought it to their own Christian village in Blimmingsari.
Why did they do that?
The sources frame it as a really smart, relationship building move, a way to show they cared about the whole community, not just their own group. And beyond just building goodwill or, making concrete, having that water fundamentally change things, they could grow multiple rice crops a year instead of just one. Big impact on well-being.
That ability to see a problem, like needing water for concrete, and turning it into a solution that benefits everyone. That seems like a key part of his approach.
Definitely. And while he was there in Bali, living in the village, he started to really understand poverty in a much deeper way.
How so? He'd experienced scarcity himself.
True, but this was different. Initially, maybe he thought, like a lot of us do, that poverty is just about not having enough stuff, enough money. But the sources say he was deeply disturbed, shocked even, as he started to see what he called the tyranny of systemic injustice, particularly this awful cycle of generational debt.
Okay, unpack that debt cycle for us. What did it look like in Bali then?
It was brutal. Imagine being a tenant farmer. You have to give like 60% of your harvest to the landowner, just massive.
60%, wow.
Yeah. So between harvests, during the lean season, how do you survive? You have to borrow money, and who do you borrow from? The same landowners.
Trapping them.
Exactly. It created this dependency, this debt that just got worse and worse, passed down from parents to children. Families were stuck for generations.
And the sources mentioned it got so bad that people were doing unimaginable things.
This is the part that's just heartbreaking. People were actually mortgaging their own children to manage the debt.
Mortgaging their children.
Yes. Ketut Suriya, the man who became David's interpreter because he spoke some English, had mortgaged his 10-year-old son.
Good grief.
Yeah.
That says everything about the desperation, doesn't it? The weight of that system.
It really does. It shows the terrible human cost. David's first reaction, working through the local church, was to provide a grant. Just give money to redeem Ketut's son, get him back.
Which makes sense. Immediate help for an immediate crisis.
Right. But that act of charity seems to have sparked a bigger thought in David's mind about what would really work long term.
He started thinking beyond just giving handouts.
Precisely. He came to this pivotal conclusion. Charity helps, obviously, but maybe small loans could be more powerful, more sustainable, reach more people, help them build their own way out, Give them agency.
And Ketut Suiria, his interpreter, the one whose son was mortgaged, he became the test case.
He did. The very first microloan recipient. It wasn't much money, one source says, around $50. Just enough for Ketut's wife to buy an old, used sewing machine.
$50 for a sewing machine. And the plan was?
For her to start a small tailoring business. Making clothes, selling them locally.
Okay, so what happened? Did it work?
It totally worked. The sources describe how she started the business, it grew, they bought a second machine, they even hired someone else from the village, and crucially, they paid back the loan.
Wow.
So that one little $50 loan wasn't just about buying a machine, it was like proof of concept. It showed that giving people capital, not just aid, could unlock their own abilities, create income, and actually start to break that horrible debt cycle.
And Ketut himself? Did he stick with just the tailoring?
Oh no, the sources say his entrepreneurial spirit took off too. He later got into import-export, started a taxi service, even a furniture business. He ended up employing other people from the community.
So that first success story really lit a fire.
You could say that. Seeing what happened with Ketut. Seeing the loan repaid so it could be used again. David was apparently really inspired. He started giving out more loans, maybe 20 or so, to others in Blummingsari and nearby villages, often working through structures that already existed like church groups or community organizations.
And the impact wasn't just financial, was it? The sources talk about something deeper.
That's a key point they make, yeah. Sure, the money helped people buy food, fix their homes, send kids to school, basic needs. But maybe even more importantly, it gave people dignity, confidence, respect. Fathers and mothers providing for their families through their own work. That's a huge shift from feeling helpless or dependent.
See that kind of transformation, seeing the loans work and get recycled. That must have been powerful.
It seems to have been the final push for David. He decided to go all in. He went back to Sydney and sold his businesses, the profitable construction supply companies.
Sold everything. What?
Specifically to set up something called the Maranatha Trust. Its whole purpose was to fund these small loans for people living in poverty. He basically liquidated his commercial success to fuel this new mission.
That's a huge commitment. And it turns out he wasn't alone in thinking along these lines.
Right, it's fascinating. Around the same time, completely independently, there was a guy named Al Whitaker. He was experimenting with a very similar idea, giving small loans to poor communities, but in South America, through an organization called IDI.
So parallel thinking on opposite sides of the world.
Pretty much. And eventually these two streams converged. David and Al found out about each other, connected, and saw they were essentially trying to do the same thing.
And they decided to team up.
Yes, they joined forces. The sources give slightly different timelines for exactly when things merged or got formalized sometimes. 1979 is mentioned for Opportunity International's beginnings. Other times, a formal fusion of Maranatha Foundation and IDI in 1986. But the main point is, their collaboration was the genesis of Opportunity International as we know it.
And David, as a co-founder, really drove the expansion.
Oh, yeah. He spent years traveling expensively, setting up support offices for Opportunity in places like Australia, the UK, Canada, Germany, France, helping to spread the model beyond Asia into Africa and eventually Eastern Europe, too.
Did he stay directly involved long term?
He was in a major leadership role for about 14 years, according to the sources. After that, he stepped back a bit from the day-to-day running of Opportunity International itself, but he didn't stop working. He kept consulting, training, helping start other centers focused on development and transformation.
Let's dig into the philosophy behind all this. The sources talk about Christian microenterprise development, or CMED. What's the core idea there?
Well, at its heart, it seems to be this fundamental belief that poverty isn't inevitable, it's not a hopeless situation, and crucially, that people living in poverty have incredible potential. They have creativity, drive, they can be entrepreneurs, producers, if they just get a chance, get the right tools.
So it's seeing potential where others might just see need.
Exactly. And CMED, as the sources describe it, isn't just about the loan. It's not purely an economic transaction.
Okay, what else is involved then?
It's framed as much more holistic. The goal is broader, something like fulfillment or overall human flourishing, rooted in a biblical worldview. The church is often seen as a key partner. The economic activity is important, vital even, but it's seen as a means to this bigger end.
So it's not just business for business' sake.
Right. David apparently realized pretty early on after making those initial loans that money is only part of the puzzle. Real lasting change, real development has to look at other things too. Health, education, spiritual well-being. It's about the whole person, the whole community, not just a transaction.
That makes sense. But what about the practical side, like getting the loans repaid? How does that fit with the values aspect?
That's a really important balance they talk about. The sources are clear. CMED combines these core Christian ideals with sound business practices. Getting loans repaid on time is crucial.
That's so crucial.
Because that's what makes it sustainable. If the money comes back, it can be lent out again, helping another family and another. It keeps the cycle going. But, and this is key, the way collection and support has to be done in love. It's not meant to be harsh or purely transactional.
So good business sense, but with a compassionate approach.
That seems to be the idea. Minimizing risk requires commitment, a clear vision, but it's always grounded in those core values.
And the ultimate goal, the so what of CME.
It really comes back to unlocking that human potential we talked about, releasing the creativity, the drive that poverty often suppresses, enabling people to build better lives for themselves and their families.
And the scale this reached is just
Yeah.
huge, right? Looking at the numbers and the sources.
It's staggering. Opportunity International's reach is massive. Figures like 6.3 million clients just in Indonesia and India at one point. Over 18 million clients across 30 countries more recently. And there's this statistic that gets mentioned, I think, based on World Bank research, suggesting that every job created through this kind of microenterprise support could potentially lift 6 people permanently out of poverty and benefit maybe 13 others in the wider community. The ripple effect is enormous.
With that kind of impact, it's no wonder he received a lot of recognition.
Yeah, the sources list quite a few significant awards. He was appointed to the Order of Australia, which is a major honor. EY Entrepreneur of the Year in 2003, Senior Australian of the Year in 2008.
And wasn't there something about being named one of Australia's most creative minds?
That's right, by the Bulletin magazine. Plus, his story was featured on that well-known ABC television show, Australian Story, so definitely widely recognized for this work.
Do the sources give any sense of his perspective now? He's in his 80s, right?
Yes, and apparently still quite active, at least before the pandemic hit, consulting, training. But the sources describe him as being quite philosophical about it all.
How so?
Well, he seems to emphasize that this incredible growth, this global organization, wasn't all down to some master strategic plan he cooked up. His perspective, as reported, is more about, well, being willing to be led, doing the thing that felt right, the thing that God put in front of him, and kind of letting the work just grow.
letting it grow rather than forcing it according to a rigid plan.
Yeah, that seems to be his takeaway. Letting life unfold, trusting the process rather than trying to control every single step and outcome. It's an interesting contrast to how we often think about achieving big goals.
So, wrapping up our deep dive here, we've really traced this incredible journey in the sources. David Bussau, from that orphanage background, building business success, hitting that economics of enough.
And then pivoting completely, moving to Darwin, then Bali, having that crucial realization about systemic poverty and debt.
Leading to that first small loan, that proof of concept with the sewing machine.
And from there, scaling it up, founding Maranatha Trust, partnering with Al Whitaker, building Opportunity International into this global force.
Underpinned by that CMED philosophy. Seeing potential, aiming for holistic change, balancing business discipline with core values.
Right. Seeing the power of small loans over just charity, but understanding it's about more than just the money.
And that final thought from Bussau himself, reflected in the sources, this idea that maybe the most impactful things aren't always meticulously planned, but sometimes they just grow when you focus on doing the next right thing that's put in front of you.
It definitely leaves you with something to think about, which leads to our final question for you, the listener. What does that idea, letting life unfold, focusing on the step right in front of you rather than needing the whole map of it? What does that mean for how you might approach the challenges or maybe the opportunities that you're facing right now? Something to chew on.